Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel.
Hey everyone, welcome. Welcome to Coffee with Foul Play. And the title of our presentation today is simply entitled Item FL. And if you've been following the MAM series, we're doing MAM series number 2. And today what we're going to be looking at is both a part of episode 7 and a part of episode 8, if you've been following the series. And what we'll be looking at today is Item FL. And of course, Item FL is extremely controversial, and hopefully we'll get through it today. So look, guys, welcome, beautiful people. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Dr. Silkman. And before we start the podcast, I hope, all of us hope, that you and your family are all okay, especially in these very trying conditions with the coronavirus. We hope everybody is safe. And today, joining me, the regular researchers, we have Bibi, Jack61, Kelly, Neverly, Obi-Wan Benobi, and One Strand in the Rav. And following our chat and fielding your questions, remember, guys, write down your questions and we'll answer them when we open up the discussion. We have Katnit, Sammy, and Zoe. And today, guys, it's my great pleasure to announce our special guest researcher. And all of you guys, I'm sure, have heard of Paul Capaldi. And before I introduce Paul, he's assured me that he's not going to be mentioning the Australian cricket team nor sandpaper. Is that right, Paul?
That's absolutely correct. I don't need to now. You've already done it for me.
Thank you, Paul. And
You're
Paul,
welcome.
before we start the podcast proper, was that you scratching sandpaper in the background?
As if.
Yeah, that was very cheeky. Paul, would you like to spend a couple of minutes and let us know what got you involved in the Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey cases? Let us know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was a long time ago, to be honest. So I'm, sometimes the memory fades when you're looking back, trying to think, what did inspire me. Recently, the Innocence File has come out, hasn't it? We've just been watching the Innocence Files. Now, when you consider that, the harm done to people who have spent all that time and they've been wrongfully convicted once, to realize that this guy has been wrongfully convicted twice, I was just filled with as Zellner said, a controlled rage. I immediately got in touch with Sheriff Herman. We had quite a lot of conversations, but I'd originally sent him quite a lot of emails, respectful emails. But then I phoned him up. And it was funny because it was him that actually mentioned in our first phone conversation about the fact that there were all these Facebook groups that had started up to do with the Steven Avery Brendan Dassey case. I hadn't heard this. This was April. This was mid-April. So I mean, Making a Murder had been out for nearly sort of 4 months, nearly 5 months. Mm-hmm. So that's all that happened. I got into the ear of Robert Herman.
Wow.
And it was basically what he was telling me that was so clearly false. I mean, on one occasion, he said to me, he started off with, Paul, I know you're not going to accept this, but you do realise that all 7 searches of the caravan, or the trailers they call it, they weren't full, hour 2, they weren't long searches. Some of them were just 10-minute sweeps. I said, Robert, I can tell by the embarrassment in your voice that, you are embarrassed to mention that, because 10 minutes would be enough to search. If you've got 4 officers going in to search that trailer, they could be done in 10 minutes without any trouble whatsoever. Correct. It's just so wrong. So that's really, to cut a long story short, then that's really got me fired up. Was the fact that
Awesome.
somebody being wrongfully convicted a second time. I must admit,
Yeah.
if I'm perfectly honest, at the time, Brendan Dassey, I thought he's just so naive. I couldn't understand why he had confessed the way he had done. It's
Yes.
only having done a bit of research into him that I realised, just what was going on there. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's to cut a long story short. That's my sort of introduction into Making a Murderer.
Thank you very much, Paul.
You're
and
welcome.
you'll see that when we start off the podcast proper, we will actually be starting with Brendan's so-called confession. So, guys, get ready for a ride. Thank you very much, Paul. All right, guys. Well, look, before we actually start the podcast proper, I'd just like to mention that one of our research panel, Zoe, she was interviewed by Linda Kay. And please check out Linda's channel, especially that interview that she did with our Zoe. And it was a real superb interview that was done. I also would like to mention that Millbilly also did a podcast looking at the new photos that have been available now. And quite a few of them were from Cuss Road, which was very, very interesting. And as you'll see, guys, on our Foul Play YouTube channel, we have a lot of presentations. We have, of course, the coffee podcasts. We have the excellent PPPs, which are spearheaded by Sammy and the girls, and they look at a variety of topics, and they recently did one as well. Please check it out. They're really informative and excellent. And, of course, we have a website that contains a lot of useful information. And I'm so proud to be part of the team. It is very much a team approach at Foul Play. We have now 945 subscribers, and that's awesome, guys. If you like what we do, please subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. If you don't like what we do, hey, that's okay. Let us know so we can improve in the future. And the videos on our channel have garnished over 200 or close to 276,000 views. And that's awesome considering we only started in August last year. All right, guys. Well, we'll make a start. Get ready, guys, because it's going to be very, very interesting. And we're going to be talking about item FL. And before I start the podcast, I want to give out a quote. This is a quote done by Ken Kratz in his book. Yes, I unfortunately read his book. One of the quotes in his book was the following, and please note it. This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case. So keep that in the back of your mind. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 1. And of course, we are all familiar with the infamous confession or interrogation session of Brendan Dassey by investigators Fassbender and Wiegert, especially the one on the 1st of March. Now, guys, remember, Fassbender and Wiegert, as investigators, they already knew that the victim had been shot in the head at least twice. Now, when you think about it, guys, only the actual killer or the accomplice of the killer who was at the crime scene would have known this piece of information. And Brendan Dassey, he was interrogated multiple times for hours on end. And Brendan Dassey never previously mentioned about shooting Teresa Halbach until investigator Mark Wiegert directly asked Brendan during the interrogation who shot her in the head. And Brendan said Steven did, because remember, Fassbender and Wiegert kept on telling Brendan that they knew what had happened. So Brendan agreed that it was Steven who shot Teresa Halbach. Fassbender continued and said, then why didn't you tell us that? And Brendan, if you see the interview, he goes, because I couldn't think of it. And, one has to wonder, you've got 2 adults here who are interrogating Brendan Dassey, and it should have been clear right then and there that Brendan Dassey really had no idea of what had happened. He clearly did not witness any shooting scenario, nothing. He completely guessed. But Wiegert told him privileged information. And that's ridiculous, because that's precisely what you want to hear from the accused, not from the principal investigator. Anyway, guys, if we have a look at slide number 2, both Fassbender and Wiegert kept on persisting. And I quote, Wiegert asked him, "Where did you take her then?" And Brendan said, "Take her outside on the side of the garage and shoot her." Wiegert, "Take her outside of the garage and shoot her?" Brendan, "On the side of it, yeah." Wiegert then asked later on, "Was she ever in the garage?" And Brendan distinctively said, "No." He shook his head, "No." But Fassbender kept on questioning Brendan. Fassbender said, "We know that something occurred in the garage and in the vehicle." And eventually Brendan agreed, yeah, we had shot her in the garage. So he's continuously changing his story depending on what the investigators are telling Brendan. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 3. And we can see after that infamous press conference on March the 1st, what had happened was there was a press conference with Sheriff Pagel and Ken Kratz. And this is the press conference where Ken Kratz basically spilled out the scenario, what had happened to Teresa Halbach and what Steven and Brendan allegedly did to her. And it's interesting that Sheriff Pagel said, and I quote, "We now know that the garage was part of the crime scene." So remember, guys, the garage had been already searched, I believe, 5 times previously. I could be wrong on that, but the garage and the trailer had already been searched multiple times. And as you can see, they go back in. The investigators, law enforcement, they come back in, including officers from the MTSO who shouldn't have been there in the first place. So the search party goes back to the Avery salvage yard and researches the garage. Let's have a look at slide number 4. Well, lo and behold, a spent bullet was found underneath the green compressor. And what's remarkable about this is that there are photographs in prior searches that show the green compressor, and there clearly isn't any bullet or bullet fragment underneath the green compressor. Suddenly, when they go back and search the garage again, one of the officers had to get on his hands and knees. Lo and behold, he finds a bullet underneath the green compressor. So this, in effect, is trying to match what Wiegert told Brendan, because Wiegert was the one that mentioned shooting in the head, not Brendan. So all of a sudden, a bullet shows up. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the officers remove the compressor and other equipment that's in the garage, and they note the position of where the bullet is. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 5. In actual fact, 2 bullet fragments were found in Steven Avery's garage. One of them was labeled item FK, which was a very badly mangled bullet fragment, which apparently everyone had missed after all the previous searches. And the other bullet fragment, which is what we'll be talking about in today's podcast, was labeled item FL. And item FL, you can see here in the square, it is a .22 inch caliber bullet fragment. And that was found on March the 2nd, 2006. So note, 2 bullet fragments were found in Steven Avery's garage. Let's have a look at slide number 6. Now, item FL and obviously item FK, they were given to Cherie Culhane. Now remember, Cherie Culhane, she was the DNA technical unit leader. She's the one that did the majority of the swabbing, the majority of the DNA analysis in the Steven Avery case. Now, she was given item FL and she was asked to describe what item FL was. And I quote, "Yes, this is crime lab item designation FL, and it is a lead bullet fragment. My initials and markings are on the packaging." Okay. Then she was asked, "All right, what did you do with item FL?" Answer: "The first thing I did was, just like every item of evidence, it was a visual examination. There was nothing visual on the fragment. There didn't appear to be any stain. So in order to remove any residual DNA that might have been on the bullet, I washed it." Now, guys, let me tell you straight away, when she was questioned on how she processes evidence, what she said was, they look for a stain. Obviously, they look for things like blood. They then do a presumptive test for blood with a swab. If it comes up positive, they do another swab and they try and extract DNA from that swab. But in this particular instance, item FL didn't have anything on it. She obviously did a visual inspection, didn't see anything on the bullet, but she, instead of swabbing the bullet, she decided to wash the entire bullet in order to extract DNA from it. So if we have a look at slide number 7, well, lo and behold, Cherie Cohen finds on item FL the full genomic DNA profile that belongs to Teresa Halbach. And remember, guys, the DNA profile from Teresa Halbach was obtained from a pap smear. And remember, the state and the defense agreed to a stipulation that no one was going to question the origin of the pap smear. So item FL had the full genomic profile of Teresa Halbach. But things went drastically wrong for Cherie Cohen. And quote, this is what she said in the trial. "That means that during the extraction procedure, I inadvertently introduced my own DNA into the negative control." Now, whenever you do a PCR reaction, you have controls, both positive and negative controls. That's to make sure that the procedure is working properly. If any of the controls are contaminated, you discard the entire experiment as has been labeled in her own laboratory manual. You throw out the entire experiment and you redo it again. Now, this caused a lot of debate during the trials. Now, let me quote what Buting said during the Steven Avery trial. "If she's capable of contaminating the control with her own, then that's evidence of cross-contamination right there. She's also testified that in that very same bench, she's had Teresa Halbach's DNA, and that it's as reasonable an inference that she's able to cross-contaminate from that to the bullet fragment as it is that she contaminated her own on the control. And it's for that reason that the protocol says when you get a contaminated control, you throw it out, because you cannot assume that the evidence sample itself has not also been contaminated." Now that was brilliant and absolutely logical and spot on. But unfortunately, if we have a look at slide number 8, Cherie Cohen knew that in order to submit that evidence to the court, she had to obtain a deviation request form. Now, when you have a deviation request form, it means that you are straying from normal protocol. Now, things happen in the laboratory. That's why you have controls, and that's why you repeat the experiment if things go wrong. But however, with item FL, it was more than one thing that went wrong. So Cherie Cohen wrote in the deviation request form the following: Note, normally the sample would be re-extracted, but in this case, there is no sample to re-extract. According to our current protocol, this sample would only be used for exclusionary purposes. However, in this case, the presence of my DNA in the manipulation control does not interfere with the interpretation of the profile from sample FL. Therefore, I propose a deviation from the protocol, allowing me to, quote, use sample FL for inclusionary purposes. So it looks like Cherie Cohen was writing her own laboratory rules. Now, the important thing about the deviation request form, first of all, it was not signed by Cherie Cohen's direct supervisor, Maria Veriali. She actually went to the Milwaukee laboratory and got it signed by Gretchen de Groot. So it was not even signed by her own supervisor. But alarmingly, it was the very first time that Cherie Cohen ever requested a deviation request form. She knew the importance of the result from item FL. And you could imagine what would have happened had she gone up to Ken Kratz or Tom Fassbender and says, I'm sorry, but I contaminated the control. I've used up all the DNA. I can't redo the experiment. Someone would have been in deep, deep trouble. But the ultimate question is this. Now, there was a lot of legal toing and throwing between Norm Garn and Debuting about, hey, should this result even be entered into the court? So the question was asked, why did Judge Willis permit item FL to be admissible as evidence? And if we have a look at slide number 9, well, one of our foul play team members actually asked Jerome Buting that very question. And he was good enough to reply during the week, and I'll read out his response. In Wisconsin at that time, we had the broadest, most wide open law on admissibility of scientific evidence in the country. Anything goes, with the reliability of evidence going only to the weight of the evidence as determined by non-scientist jurors, not to its admissibility. The law was changed a few years later to impose the Dorbort standard, which might have made a difference on the admissibility of FL. But note the following, but certainly would have precluded the FBI's untested EDTA test. In practice, however, the change has meant that proposed state evidence still comes in no matter what, but defense scientific evidence often gets excluded. The system is rigged against the defense under any rules that are imposed. So that's truly remarkable. And so Judge Willis allowed item FL evidence to be included, to be admissible. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 10. So why is this important? Well, we know that the victim was shot at least twice in the skull, once in the parietal area, which is close to your left-hand side temple, and one in the occipital area, which is directly in the back of your skull. And I remember when, if you were watching, ma'am, when this information was presented in court, you can hear the silence and the tension in the courtroom. This was very, very damning. Well, anyway, they found burnt cremains, allegedly from Steven Avery's burn pit, and 2 of the cranial bone fragments contain what is known as bevelling. That's an indication that a high-velocity bullet has struck the skull, and they found 2 cranial bone fragments, both had bevelling. So Jeffrey Jensen was asked about this, and take note what he said. There's material, and I was given information that there was a spent bullet recovered at the scene that contained the blood specimens of the decedent. Now, guys, we already know that that's not true. because Shariko Hain, who examined the bullet, and I quote, said, nothing visual on the fragment. So where Dr. Jensen got the notion that it contained blood, I have no idea. Clearly, item FL did not have any blood. It didn't have any tissue. It had nothing on it. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 11. So studies have shown that if a bullet strikes a skull, a human skull, the wound on the outside, the hole on the outside of the skull, is much smaller than the hole inside the skull, because as the bullet transits the skull, you get like an explosion of bone on the inside of the skull. And what you form is known as a bevel. And you can see that in the middle diagram. So what we're looking at here, guys, is on the inside of the cranial bone fragment. So we're looking at, so the outside has got a much smaller hole as depicted by the arrow, but on the inside, you can see that the hole has expanded. It's formed a bevel. That's diagnostic of a high velocity bullet strike. To prove that, they also x-rayed the bone fragments. And what they found in the bone fragments were little silver, tiny silver projections. These were identified as lead fragments. Remember, item FL is a lead bullet. When it transited the skull, it left lead fragments embedded in the bone. So there's no doubt that the victim was shot at least twice from a high velocity projectile, a bullet. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 12. Now, Dr. Jensen was asked about what was the cause of death of Teresa Halbach. And I quote, answer, it would be my opinion that she died as a result of gunshot wounds to the head, and that the manner of her death would be homicide. Question, and based upon your examination of the skull fragment and x-rays and all the associated reports in this case, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of Teresa Halbach's death? Answer, yeah. I believe that the cause of her death would be the gunshot wound to the head, and the manner would be the homicidal designation. Now, guys, let me just read Ken Kratz's quote that he wrote in his book. This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case. But guys, Ken Kratz was very, very clever, because in the trial testimonies, you won't find him saying that item FL directly hit skull bone, but he gave the impression that it did. Think about it, guys. They found 2 bullet fragments in Steven Avery's garage, and they found 2 cranial bone fragments, both with bullet holes in them. So the key question that Kathleen Zellner wanted to answer was this: did item FL inflict the wound to the head of Teresa Halbach? So guys, let's have a look at slide 13. Well, in order to answer this question, she needed to reconstruct the gunshot wounds to skull bone. So she hired Luke Haig, who's a forensic ballistics consultant. What Luke Haig did was that he used bovine scapulars in his test firings. Now, bovine scapulars are good because they contain regions in the scapula of exactly the same thickness as a human skull bone, between 6 to 9 millimeters. So let's have a look at slide number 14. And what Luke Haig was firing were .22 long rifle bullets. And you can see the size of them. They're relatively small, and they are of a .22 caliber. But Luke Haig told Kathleen Zellner something very important. And he said that when the bullet goes through the bone, there should be bone fragments in the .22 lead. Let's have a look at slide number 15. So what Luke Haig did was he reconstructed a human skull. And by doing that, he put one scapula at one end. He used 6 inches of soft tissue simulant in between. And that soft tissue simulant is about the approximate density of a brain and the distance of a human skull, about 6 inches. And then he placed another scapula at the other end. So his setup was meant to simulate or represent a human skull. And as you can see, he was firing .22 caliber bullets into the bovine scapulas. So let's have a look at slide number 16. So what he did was he showed Kathleen Zellner that when the bullet struck the very first scapula, it entered into the soft simulant block. And what he said to Kathleen Zellner was that it went through one layer of scapula and it lost velocity very, very quickly. In other words, it had spent all of its energy going through the block. It did not even make a mark on the second scapula. And ballistic experts have said that a .22 bullet, it's very rare that it's going to do a through and through bullet wound through human skull, because it's got to go through a multiple layer of bone. And Luke Haig showed that the second scapula was not even touched. So what Luke Haig did is he got the exemplar bullets from the simulant gel, and these were collected and they were going to be examined. So let's have a look at slide number 17. Well, here's the game changer right here. So Dr. Chris Palanek placed the bullets, the Haig exemplar bullets that had gone through bone, under a high-powered microscope. And you can see here both the side of the bullet and the front face of the bullet. That front face of the bullet had struck bone. It had gone through a scapula. So let's have a look at slide number 18. Well, lo and behold, when the Dr. Chris Palanek changed certain settings on the microscope to show contrast, we get these following images. Now, what he did was very, very important. He took a photograph of the bullet before it was washed for DNA extraction. And that's the image we get on the left. He then subsequently washed the bullet, like Cherie Culhane would have done for DNA extraction, and then re-examined the bullet. And as you can see, the right-hand image is almost identical to the left-hand side image. Guys, that's important. It means that washing the bullet doesn't remove bone. The bone is embedded in the soft lead. So what you have here are bone shards. But wait, Chris Palanek had to prove that what was embedded in the lead was indeed bone. So let's have a look at slide number 19. So Chris Palanek placed the bullet, the Haig exemplar bullets, under a scanning electron microscope. And he was able to determine that there were regions in the bullet that were high in phosphorus. He also showed that the same regions were also high in calcium. And the image to the right is a superimposition of both the areas that were rich in phosphorus and rich in calcium. That's remarkable, but actually not quite surprising. It basically meant that the Haig exemplar bullet was rich in bone shards. So bone fragments had been embedded in the bullet lead. Now that's beautiful, clean science. That's exactly what Steven Avery's attorneys should have done in the first place. It would have made a huge difference, and I'll show you why. All right, so the Hague exemplar bullet had bone shards in it. Now, if we have a look at slide 20, this is important, guys, because William Newhouse examined item FL, and he also examined a rifle, the Marlin Glenfield Model 60 rifle, which was a .22 caliber rifle, and it was found in Steven Avery's bedroom hanging on a rack, right? So it's rather bizarre when you think about it, because if Steven Avery had shot Teresa Halbach 10 or 11 times, you would think you want to hide the rifle, but no, it was there on full display on top of his bed on a gun rack. So what William Newhouse did is that he fired test rounds in that particular Marlin Glenfield Model 60 rifle, and he compared the grooves and landings between item FL and the test fired bullets, and they lined up. So what happens is each rifle has got a unique barrel, and when the bullet is fired and it travels down the barrel, you get grooves and landings, basically markings on the bullet. So if you fire bullets from that gun, they're going to have identical markings on the bullet. So he concluded, William Newhouse concluded, that item FL was indeed fired from that rifle that was in Steven Avery's bedroom. Now remember, the jury and the judge are hearing all this information, and they must be putting two and two together and are being horrified. Now, one important point here, guys, the actual rifle itself was owned by Roland Johnson. It wasn't owned by Steven Avery. And remember, Steven Avery was living or renting in Roland Johnson's trailer. So, Kathleen Zellner, if we have a look at slide number 21, Kathleen Zellner was very interested in getting her hands on item FL, the bullet, the so-called magic bullet. So she and a colleague spoke with Tom Fallon and Norm Garn. And fortunately for Kathleen Zellner, the state allowed her to get her microscopist to examine the bullet. However, note, a state agent had to be present when they were examining the bullet. Now, the irony is this, right? Because Buting and Strang wanted to observe Cherie Cohen when she was doing her PCR testing of item FL, but both were precluded from coming into the laboratory, now wait for it, because it could increase the chance of contamination. And what does Cherie Cohen actually do? Allegedly, she was demonstrating and teaching two of her students, and of course, she actually contaminated the negative control. So that's, karma in a way. Okay, so the important thing is Kathleen Zellner was able to get item FL. Let's have a look at slide number 22. So the question that Kathleen Zellner asked was, okay, were there bone fragments embedded in item FL? And so Dr. Chris Palanek examined item FL, and you can see on the right-hand side of the bullet that is item FL. Well, lo and behold, if we have a look at slide 23, item FL was examined under high-power microscope. And what was obvious was that on the surface of item FL were wooden shards that had embedded in the soft lead. Also, there appeared to be a red liquid, very similar to paint, that was present on the surface of the bullet. They also found wax that was present on the surface of the bullet, and cotton fibers, like you would find in a Q-tip, which is very, very interesting because no one had mentioned that item FL was swabbed, but clearly there were cotton fibers present in the bullet. Now, there's been a lot of controversy regarding the wax, and I know that Kathleen Zellner made a comment that oh, look, they probably used a chapstick and just rubbed it on the bullet. But Dr. Chris Palahniuk said to her, to Kathleen Zellner, look, it's quite likely that the wax was used to fix the bullet in a holder when you do microscopic analysis. So the wax probably is non-nefarious. But it's good that we can discuss these things and get urban legends out of the way. So here's the important part. If we have a look at slide 24, well, this was a big aha moment. So Dr. Chris Palahniuk used the scanning electron microscope in order to determine whether bone was present in item FL. He concluded that there was no evidence of bone in item FL. Now, you could imagine what impact that would have had in Steven Avery's trial. That's huge because it means you can't link item FL to the cranial bone fragments. But there was more. There was a lot more. So if we have a look at slide 25, we're nearly finished, guys. Let me summarize the findings of item FL. So here's a picture of item FL under high-powered microscopy. First, there's no evidence that item FL passed through bone. That's a major, major finding. However, there is evidence that the fired bullet had actually gone through a wooden object. There was also the presence of red droplets, which could have been either paint or red liquid. There was the presence of wax on the surface of the bullet. There's also the presence of cotton fibers. Now, keep this in mind, guys, that Cherie Cohen noted no blood or staining on the bullet. Yet, here's the bizarre thing. Teresa, the full genomic profile of Teresa Halbach was found by Cherie Cohen. And that seemed rather odd because there was no blood, no tissue, no staining, and no bone shards. So the obvious question is, where did this DNA come from? So if we have a look at slide number 26, I won't go through the entire testimony, but it became pretty obvious that Roland Johnson had fired his rifle, his .22 rifle, around 3,000 rounds all around the Avery salvage yard. And that also included firing around the garage. There were gopher holes and squirrels and other little animals all around the place, including near the garage. And he was asked, sure, I understand, but how close do you think you ever were to the garage when you'd be shooting it? Answer, right at the garage door opening. So in all actuality, it's highly likely that it was Roland Johnson who fired item FL. And I don't think he was firing it at Teresa Halbach. So guys, let's have a look at slide number 27. So, knowing this, what Kathleen Zellner did is she returned back to Steven Avery's garage to see if there was any evidence of bullets being fired close to or around the garage. Lo and behold, she discovered bullet fragment holes in the wall of the garage. Now note, these bullet fragments were in-facing. It meant that someone, probably Roland Johnson, had fired the rifle into the wall of the garage and it went through the wall. And what she found was some of the bullets were either still lodged in the wood or on the ground. So she opened up the paneling and she could see that in between the paneling were fibers as well. So what Kathleen Zellner did, if we have a look at the right-hand side on the bottom, she fired bullets into the garage wall. Let's have a look at slide number 28. So you can see here there were bullet holes inside the on the wall of the garage, And when she went inside the garage, she was able to retrieve exemplar bullets. So she gave the bullets to Chris Palanek to examine. So if we have a look at slide number 29, so you can see item FL and you can see Kathleen's exemplar bullet, and lo and behold, both of those bullets, not 100% identical, but they contain wood shards, right? So it draws the conclusion that item FL hit a wooden object, and Kathleen Zellner was able to show that her exemplar bullets that went through the garage wall had the same appearance. They had shards of wood embedded in the lead. So now, guys, if we look at slide number 30, we can have a look at the ultimate comparison. We can have a look, this is slide 30, we can have a look at item FL, Kathleen exemplar's bullet, and Haig's exemplar bullet. Item FL had no bone, it had wood shards and paint, it had wax and cotton fibers. Kathleen Zellner's exemplar bullet had wood in it. Now, the Haig's exemplar bullet that went through a scapula had bone. So here we can have a direct comparison of all three exemplar bullets. So if we have a look at slide number 31, and here's the killer for the state, and that is item FL resembles Kathleen Zellner's exemplar bullet, one that went through wood, rather than the bullet that went through bone. So that's Luke Haig's exemplar bullet. And this is exactly how you would do good scientific testing. You do all of these experiments and then compare the results. But here's the ultimate question. If item FL never struck bone, nor contained any signs of blood or tissue, but contained wood fragments and red paint, what was the source of Teresa Halbach's DNA that Culhane found on it? Now think about this. There's two possible outcomes. Either we have accidental contamination of item FL with DNA from Teresa Halbach. Now remember, Cherie Culhane had extracted Teresa Halbach's DNA at her bench. And because she contaminated the negative control, it means that contamination had taken place. So she could have accidentally, and I've got my fingers in quotation marks, contaminated item FL with Teresa Halbach's DNA. If not, guys, that leads us to the other alternative, and that is pure evidence tampering, shoddy forensic science, right? Now, clearly, these experiments, they had a profound impact. They had a profound impact on Ken Kratz. Let me read his quote one more final time. I quote, "This bullet was the game changer. It would make my case." Well, let's have a look what he then said in his book. And we on our final slide here, slide 32. And I quote in Ken Kratz's book, "There's just one problem. The state's actual trial theory was that item FL, the bullet containing Teresa Halbach's DNA, passed through soft tissue, not bone. And therefore, the fact that no bone was found on it refutes exactly nothing. I should know. It was my theory. Nowhere in almost 7 weeks of trial transcripts will you find me claiming that item FL was the bullet that caused either of the two entrance wounds found by Dr. Eisenberg when examining fragments of Teresa's skull. Just because the state found 2 bullet fragments and 2 entrance wounds does not mean that pair of findings is any way related. To advance a headshot theory for those bullets, we would also have needed to uncover evidence of exit wounds in other skull fragments. None were found." But the problem is, Ken, if a bullet is through and through, it means that it's gone through 2 2 layers of bone, which means, of course, it will have bone shards in it. So now Ken Kratz acknowledges the fact that idomethil cannot be linked to the cranial bone fragments. But guys, can you see that this had a devastating effect in court? Because people were looking at 2 bullets, 2 beveling fragments that were burnt, cut, and the fact that idomethil was fired from the rifle that was hanging in Steven Avery's bedroom. But now, Ken Kratz has the gall to say, no, that bullet's got nothing to do with the cranial bone fragments. It passed through her body. So now Ken Kratz is in speculation land. That's exactly where Kathleen Zellner is going to go with idomethil. And guys, let me point out, speculation is the forming of a theory or conjecture without firm evidence. And it's similar to conjecture, theorizing, hypothesizing, supposition, guesswork. In other words, it's junk. And through the brilliant work of Kathleen Zellner and her experts, they were elegantly able to show that idomethil very, very likely has got nothing to do with the crime that took place. Idomethil never touched Teresa Halbach, and now the state is in an embarrassing position. Where did that DNA come from? If they're smart, they would say contamination, because otherwise it will point to direct evidence tampering. All right, guys. I'm spent myself. Guys, let's open it up to the panel and let's ask some questions. Jack 61.
I think it's just important to understand that of all the hundreds or even thousands of bullets around that garage, the cops picked up 2 fragments. One was FK, I think. Is that correct? FK
Correct.
and FL.
Correct.
And of those 2, one had Teresa Halbach's DNA on it in such minute amounts, we
Correct.
have no idea where the hell it came from.
Yes.
It's just a commentary. That's all I really got.
And also item FK was so mangled, the expert Newhouse couldn't determine where it was fired from, which rifle it was fired from, and there was no DNA on it.
Right. Nothing. Of all the thousands of bullets that were around that
Correct.
garage.
Correct.
I can't believe it. I just cannot buy it at all. I can't.
Correct. But you have to admit, Jack, it had a devastating impact in court. One Strand.
Oh, good morning, Dr. Silkman.
Good morning, One Strand.
The one thing that really sticks out with this part to me is the trajectory of each of those skull bullets. The first one is at the back of the skull. The second one is at the temple. That is executionary style shooting. That is not someone shooting a shotgun from a few feet away. And if she was on her back, how did we get the gunshot wound in the rear of her head, executionary style? None of it makes any sense, and it's a more sophisticated killer than what we see in this case, and that's just screaming to me here.
100% agree, One Strand. The shooting incident was extremely violent, and it is very much execution style. And one has to beg the question, why the need to shoot someone twice in the skull? It's completely crazy. I have no answer for that one. Guys, any other questions? Kelly.
I like how you say, Dr. Silkman, the victim was shot in the head, because yes, a victim was shot in the head. That doesn't mean it was Teresa.
Correct. I've learnt my lesson on that one, haven't I, BB? Yes. It's funny.
I've trained him well.
You have trained me very well, BB. It's interesting how in the same sentence, you have to say victim and then Teresa Halbach, because the state was saying that the victim was Teresa Halbach without actually proving that that it actually was Teresa Halbach. So you have to be very careful. Kelly, any more comments?
Yeah, I actually was like taking some notes as we we're going through that, and like I wrote like the bullet may have been Ken's game changer, but the irony may be it'll be Kathleen's too, especially when she goes to court. If she can go through all this and bring her professionals and scientific proof that, you know, it wasn't FL, was no relation to Teresa, then she's debunked it. There goes the whole idea that bullet was near Teresa. Bang, finished, gone.
No question.
Over.
No question. See, guys, you got to remember, Ken Kratz is now in speculation land. When he says, oh, no, item FL went through soft tissue, there's only one problem, guys. There's no body. So hence there's no in-shot or out-shot. You can't actually prove that item FL traversed Teresa Halbach. The state is screwed. One rev. One rev. One strand. His name is too long.
Oh, Lord. I'm sorry. You have to blame Miss Linda Kay for that one.
No problems at all.
So with the testimony that the state's, now I'm losing my train of thought. The state's, goodness.
Expert.
There we go. That's the word I wanted. Where he says, I was informed that there was blood on this bullet.
Yes.
This once again, it just shows Ken Kratz's preparation of his witnesses to get the false evidence and the false the false evidence in front of the jury and on record without being very obvious.
Correct. One strand, that's a very important point. Now, you think about this because Dr. Jensen was asked, okay, what did this bullet actually do? And because somebody told him it had blood on it, he then goes, oh, it had to traverse the brain because the brain is jelly-like, it's full of blood. Yeah, it definitely went through the brain. So you think about it, the jury and the judge are hearing this thinking, uh-oh, this actually happened. This bullet struck bone, went into the brain, caused Teresa Halbach, potentially Teresa Halbach's death. This is devastating for the defense, and it's devastating for Steven. Neverly, do you have a comment?
I have a question, Dr. Silkman, regarding Chris Palahniuk and Cherie Cohane. Did they do the same technique to determine their findings? Was it comparable?
Well, Cherie Cohane didn't do. Oh, you mean like whether they tested for the DNA?
For the
Is that what you
DNA
mean?
and for the microtrace.
Okay, no. The microtrace was done by Chris Palahniuk. Cherie Cohane only visually looked at the bullet. I don't think she placed it under a microscope. And however, the problem is, Neverly, the defense can't extract DNA from the bullet. It's all gone. Cherie Cohane did a one-time experiment. The state can't go back. Sorry, the defense can't go back and retest item FL. There is no more DNA left, Neverly. It's all gone.
Yeah, I understand
Well, and
that.
plus the
Go ahead.
microscopes got much better in these.
Yes,
right?
they have. They
Yeah.
have. But sorry, Neverly. But what Cherie Cohane could have done was just put it under a low-powered binocular microscope. So increase the size of the bullet fragment by 10 or 100-fold to have a look at the surface to see if there's any blood, and it should be fairly obvious. But also, Neverly, remember, she extracted DNA. She would have said, oh, I noticed that my solution turned red. But there's none of that. It's because the bullet never struck tissue. It never struck an object that had blood in it. And so that was the giveaway clue that item FL never struck anything, right?
Yeah,
Except
and the
a
item
wood
FL
panel.
was just a fragment, correct?
It was a bullet
So-
fragment, correct?
Fragment, yes. So it was tiny. So for her to visually inspect for blood, that would be kind of hard to see unless it was covered in crusty blood.
Yes, but like I said, you could have either placed it under a microscope and you would have seen the presence of red blood cells or tissue, because Ken
Yeah.
Kratz is now saying that that bullet was a through and through, right? So, but the problem is, of course, if it went through her body, what did it do? Did it bounce off the bulletproof tarp and then embed itself in a wall? You see, because it's got wooden shards in it, it meant that the bullet hit the wall at high velocity. So, and also then picked up red paint. So, what did it do? Where did it pick up the red paint? So, the state are in big, big trouble. Semi, do you have a
Finally. Thank you.
Yes.
They're going to
Thank
be in
you.
trouble.
Thank you, Neville.
Well, we know now with the SEM, the scanning electron microscope, they can detect calcium and phosphorus, which equal bone. And then things like the wood or the paint would show up as like something synthetic or, not
Correct.
biologic.
Correct. And the other important point is this. This is what I think Neville was trying to get at. If you did the microtrace analysis, you would have detected the chemical composition of blood, because blood's got hemoglobin, it's got iron. So when Chris Palahniuk would have been doing the examination, the chemical examination, there would have been peaks to say, yep, this is diagnostic of blood, this is diagnostic of tissue. No, he found calcium and phosphorus. That's in Haig's exemplar bullet, to determine that it was bone. But when they looked at item FL, there was nothing to suggest the presence of organic material.
He surely found wood, and he even specified if it was, there are two kinds of wood, right? Didn't he say that?
Correct. And not only that, he said that if they actually remove the wooden fragments, they can determine the species of where the wood came from. And he said that one of the pieces of wood was like a paneling. It was like manufactured wood. Jack 61.
Going back a little bit about talking about the Daubert standard that Buting talked about that got introduced whatever year it was after the trial.
Yes.
Did you look into that any at all? A little. I mean, did you read a little bit
I haven't done any. No, but please tell us, Jack 61.
Well, I did, and I had looked at this before, but it had been a long time because I remember some whatever came up about it. But anyway, the Daubert standard that pretty much, I guess every state has it now. There are 5 key elements, and without going into too deep in them, they're pretty basic. And one is whether the theory or technique in question can be and has been attested. Whether number 2, whether it has been subjected to peer review, which I think that's important for the EDTA,
Yes.
and publication. Number 3, its known or potential error rate, which again, I think that's another key. You have to have an error rate, right?
Correct. Yes, you do. You do.
Okay. So number 4, existence and maintenance of standards controlling its operation. And number 5,
sorry, Jackson.
It's all right. Number 5, whether it has attracted widespread acceptance within a relevant scientific community.
Yep. And thank you, Jack 61. You could tell that Shariko Haim would have been in trouble, and the EDTA would have never been admissible. It's junk. And because Shariko Haim contaminated the negative control, it wouldn't have been admissible as well. The judge should have said to her, come back to me when you redo the experiment. That's what the judge should have said. But clearly the judge didn't understand or didn't want to understand the importance of the controls.
Well, it's like he said, it's that, it was the Wild West. Anything goes. They let, I mean, they could have probably driven a Mack truck into the courtroom and he would have said, oh,
Yes.
okay, just let it on in.
Yes, correct. One Strand, do you have a comment?
Going back to what your favorite person, Sherry, found or afterwards, what has been found on the bullet. She never swabbed that bullet.
No.
So the cotton swab to me, again, everything's screaming at me today,
Oh,
is
no.
how Teresa, using a swab, is how Teresa's DNA got on that bullet.
That's a possibility. That is indeed. So, in other words, it's a transfer.
Yes, sir.
You basically dip your you dip your swab in a solution containing Teresa Halbach's purified DNA, and you dab it on the bullet, and that's it. No one's going to know. No one is going to know. And I suppose that now explains why Cherie Cohen didn't want Dean Strang and Jerome Buting overlooking her on her shoulders. And to me, it also indicates that I think she lied, that she was teaching two people at the same time. I think she used it as an excuse to cover up her contamination.
I don't believe that she had anyone in there. Who would have student or interns in the most important piece of one of the key pieces of evidence in the case, and not wear a
Correct.
face shield. She was notorious about not wearing a face shield. She admitted it in pretrial.
Correct.
She did.
Actually,
correct.
what she said was she was training two
One
new
strand.
employees.
Right. Yeah. Two introductory employees. That's correct.
Correct.
And if that's so, there should be a
Neverly.
record of them being
Yes, there should be. I don't think
well,
that evidence has
should
ever come
in
forward.
Wisconsin is another story.
Correct.
Now that I got
Correct.
your attention, can I just ask you if you could
Sure.
clarify, please, once and for all, the deviation process? When she asked for it, was it approved? And if so, who approved it? Because my understanding of that is, again, it's pretty shady business. Thank you.
And aren't the dates screwed up on it too? Like she put in for it
Yes.
before it happened or
Too-
something?
Yeah.
Yes, but I can explain that. I actually did a presentation on item FL, and what I found was I looked at the contamination records that they've got in the lab. They've got a lab book where they write down the dates, and what happens is that some of the staff members, they don't report the contamination on the date that it actually happened. Sometimes several days or even a week can go by before they report it. So there was a lot of theory going around saying, oh, she got a deviation request form before doing the experiment. No, that's not the case. It just meant that she was slack in reporting the contamination date. And to prove it, on one of the pages, you can see that the recordings of the contamination is out of sync. So that confirms that Cherie Cohen, instead of reporting the date of the contamination, she had actually waited, I think, several days and then reported it. So, I mean, obtaining a deviation request form is serious, absolutely serious. And what Cherie Cohen wanted to do was illegal because her deviation request was only meant to be for exclusionary purposes, not inclusionary purposes, because she knew, Neverly, that she had one shot. That's it. If item FL was inadmissible, it meant that there was no sign of Teresa Halbach either in Steven Avery's trailer and garage. That's it. His case would have been purely 100% circumstantial. All right, guys. Do we have any more questions?
I do,
Neverly.
actually. I read or heard or listened to about the deviation process, that that deviation process was actually signed off by somebody who's not even working in her lab, but it was a
Correct.
lab in Madison.
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee. Yeah,
Yeah.
Milwaukee. So it's not her direct supervisor, but
No,
somebody
it's
from a
not.
different lab.
Correct. Correct.
Must be
Which is-
legit, right there.
Well, I think I think the problem is that Marie Variali probably didn't want to sign it. Said, I'm not signing this crap.
That's
Oh,
exactly
we have
what
a
I think
decent
too.
person. Oh,
Yeah.
That's
Well,
refreshing.
I think she told her,
Well,
I'm not
maybe.
signing that damn thing. You just sent out. It's not. I'm not doing it.
yeah,
And she, it's interesting to note also, Dr. Silkman and Everly, is that Norm Gahn, where's he from?
oh
He's from
God,
Milwaukee. He's from Milwaukee. I mean, you
right,
know. So hey, Sherry says, hey, my lady's not going to sign this. My supervisor. Norm says, oh wait, I'll make a phone call. I mean,
yeah,
this is speculation, but come on.
yeah. No,
It's not
but
what you know, it's who you know, right?
Right.
yes, but the other important point is this: it was actually Norm Gahn who argued that the deviation was sensible and that the jury would understand it because they were, quote, reasonable people. And so oh,
With
they
common
broke
sense,
with common sense.
right?
They correct. And if there was a molecular biologist on the panel, it would have been really, really bad for Shariko Hain and the state, because that's the reason why you have controls. You have controls to determine and check for the integrity of the experiment. If you have contamination in a control, you toss it out and you do it again. Because Shariko Hain took a gamble and used up all the DNA, she actually would have needed a deviation request form for using up all the DNA because that's not protocol, right? Protocol states you keep at least half. So she's breaking rules left, right, and center. Jack
Aren't you a
61.
molecular biologist, Dr. Silkman?
Yes, I am. That's my background. Correct.
That's what I thought.
And it's actually quite embarrassing, guys, because that's my profession. And I did experiments with students, and one of the experiments we did was on PCR, and we would fail a student if they couldn't explain the importance of PCR controls. And what we tell our students is this: no matter how good your test result is, if your PCR controls have failed, you can draw no conclusion from the result. And to make matters worse, guys, that's exactly what Cherie Cohane's laboratory manual says. So she had to break that rule. Sammy, do you have a comment?
I have a question about item FL and Brendan Dassey. Was he convicted solely on confession, or was this also part of his case?
No, only on confession. Only on confession. And the important thing here, guys, is that Kathleen Zellner's experts have shown that item FL never struck bone. And so Ken Kratz now has to speculate that it went through her body, bounced off the bulletproof blue tarp, right, BB?
For sure.
Right?
I still need to
And
find out where
then-
to purchase those.
And then, having gone through a human body, we're talking about a 0.22, it then bounced off the cement and then embedded itself in the wood paneling and somehow got red paint on it, and then it fell to the ground. That's it. That's all.
Like something
Nothing
from
to-
the Warren Commission, right?
Yeah, even better.
Oh no!
Yeah.
No. This actually is better than the magic bullet from the Warren Commission. Actually, better. This ups it. Sammy, do you have another question?
Yeah, Sherry on here is saying, did Dr. Silkman say
Hold on.
that there was?
Did you say Cherie?
Yeah,
What's she
that's
doing
what it
on-
looks like.
Oh, she found us.
Oh Lord.
He asked if Dr. Silky said that there was no biological material on the bullet. When a lab tech has DNA from a person, is the DNA completely separate from its source?
Well, the thing is this. You can get DNA obviously from a variety of sources. And normally, and this is what Cherie Cohane said in trial testimony, it's normally from nucleated cells. So cells in your body, skin cells, tissue cells, anything that's got a nucleus. However, if you isolate DNA and you purify it, you can also obtain a droplet of that DNA and put it on the bullet. or contaminated liquid. So it doesn't need a cellular source if you've got it in pure form. So when you do a PCR reaction, when you do the test, it's not going to know whether it came from cells or from a pure source, because you do what is known as a DNA extraction. So if you can deliberately contaminate a sample with either cells or from pure DNA, then you're going to get the same result. And I know I'm thinking mischievously here, guys, but if she touched the bullet on one of the pap smear slides, that's how you can get Teresa Halbach's DNA on that bullet. Easy, but I'm being nefarious. Jack 61.
I think that Norm Gahn, and especially Krauss, were counting on the jury not being sophisticated enough. When Norm Gahn, this DNA kind
Correct.
of lawyer prosecutor, when he says, you just got to use common sense,
Correct.
he's counting on the jury not understanding the significant importance of these protocols that are put in place in these labs and the reason for them.
Correct. I mean, look, here's the problem. DNA evidence can be easily misused. So the court will be thinking, oh, okay, her DNA's on that bullet. That means that Teresa Halbach must have been in the garage. So most of them are not sophisticated enough to think, well, wait a minute, could it have been there through nefarious means? Could it have been there through simple contamination? Paul Capaldi.
Yes, hi there. Excellent presentation, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Paul.
Couple of items. First of all, I like item FL. I think it totally embarrasses Showskip. But a question for you, Dr. Silkman. Is it true that so far Kathleen Zellner has been given item L to look at, but they haven't actually tested it yet, have they? It was only looked at under a microscope. Are there other tests, do you think, that her experts would like to do on that book with regarding the source of the wood?
Yes. And I reckon they've probably done it already.
Right. Okay.
So all they have to do is really sample some of the wood that's actually in the shed and determine. Chris Palanek said, I can determine the species. And in actual fact, if you read his affidavit that he did, he actually says, if further testing is required, I could do it. So in other words, he can actually match the wood that's in item FL to actually wood in the wood paneling of the garage. And that's powerful stuff, because that is direct evidence that the bullet was shot from outside the garage, went through the paneling and fell to the ground and never struck a human being. And here you've got Roland Johnson, who actually admitted firing that rifle all around the garage, including right at the garage door. So yes, a further trace analysis can be done on the wood. And I've always said it, guys, item FL is going to bring down the state, because then they've got nothing but circumstantial evidence. You can argue the key. You can argue the hood latch, right? If you take away the bullet, that means that Teresa Halbach was never in the trailer nor the garage. So you've now removed a very incriminating piece of evidence. And Paul, I don't think they're going to try and extract DNA, because there's none left. There's none left on it.
Exactly. No, thanks for clearing that one up. It's something that's interesting. I'm sure whether they had simply been able to look at it and weren't able to do anything with it, or whether they actually, because they've also looked at the key as well, haven't they, and discovered stuff on it.
Correct.
But we're deviating. We're deviation to go into that subject, don't we?
Oh yeah, for sure. But put it this way, Paul. Put it this way. If item FL had bone shards in it, then Steven Avery would have been in huge trouble.
Exactly.
I mean, because you think about it, what are they going to do? You can't defend it.
Yeah.
But the mere fact that Idomethil had no bone shards, but wood and paint and wax and also fibers, that's pretty good evidence that it never struck a human being.
Absolutely.
Bibi, thank you, Paul. Bibi, do you have a
Welcome.
comment?
Yeah, and there's another test too. If they still had the 2 pieces of scalp or skull, those little specks of the lead that's in the
yes.
what is that called? Radio pack.
Radio pack. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, because they could actually test that little teeny pieces of lead and see if it even matched those kind of lead that's in the bullets from Steve's game. Yeah. Steve's gun, I mean.
Correct.
Or Raleigh's gun, yeah.
Correct. And they didn't do it. The
state never did. Well, or they knew it wasn't going to match, so.
Correct. Because if it wasn't a match, all of a sudden you've eliminated Idomethil and the rifle.
Right.
So the state actually didn't test the lead that was present in the bone fragment because they knew that if the elemental composition was different to Idomethil, party's over. But Kathleen Zellner actually did it for them. She proved that it never touched bone. So hence, that lead fragment could not have come from Idomethil.
No, but if they'd have let her have the skull.
Oh, the skull for sure. But remember, they gave away the bones.
Right.
So the Halbach family's got them. So yes. So you can see that what the state actually did was they removed as much of the evidence as possible because look what she did with Idomethil. Imagine if she was able to test the pelvic bone found at the Manitowoc County gravel pit. It would have been game over, right? So, yeah, it's unfortunately, but the bones can't be retested. One strand.
Personally, for me, I don't even, with doing that testing, looking at the evidence as far as the trajectory of the shots and how they were done, that appears to me more like someone would have used a 22 at close range versus a shotgun. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't think it was a shotgun. It had to be a rifle or a handgun.
A handgun is what I was meaning.
Yes,
I'm more likely.
Yeah, but here's the problem, right? I think they only found 25% of the skull. So the other part of the skull, no one has found them. So you can't do a total skull reconstruction because what they'll do is then measure the diameter of the bevelling. So they have to then do test firing using various rounds to actually determine what the bullet was that struck the bone. So I'm not a gun expert. I don't know what type of hole a .22 would make. I've never fired a rifle, so I don't know. But
so how was Dr. Leisenberg, who is not, as far as I know, a bullet or handgun expert, able to say what it came from?
She can't. She only said in her reports from a high velocity weapon. Unfortunately, my understanding is that the .22 is not a high velocity weapon. In other words, the bullet itself would not have enough penetrating power to go through skull twice.
So more like twice. A 9mm?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't want to mention any bullet sizes, calibers, because I'm not a gun expert.
Oh, probably we need one of those. We need one of those.
357 Magnum, something with some oomph to it.
A Glock?
Yes. Well, the thing is, that could all be tested. You could test it on pig carcasses, pig skulls, something that's equivalent to a human or even potentially human cadavers. But I'm sure all of that has been done because remember in the world wars, in military concentrations, they would have had plenty of skull wounds, so they would know what type of bullet causes what type of damage. And we know that the victim was still in one piece. In other words, was not a skeleton when shot. Because if you shoot skeletal skull, you have cracks in it. And this didn't give the crack marks. So in other words, the body still was intact and still had a brain, right? That's important. And that's even what Dr. Jensen said. If it was a skeleton, some people theorize that only a skeleton was shot. That's not the case, because you would have got fracturing, because the skull would have been empty. You would have got much more damage to the skull. And Bevelling.
Yeah, just going back a little bit on the original story that Kratz said. He presented no evidence in trial that any other part of her body was shot.
Correct.
And that the cause of death was connected to anything other than the item FL, that she was shot, right?
Correct.
And which was found on the floor in the garage. Well, then he wrote a book, and in the book he spewed some BS, right?
Correct. He changed.
Which that's not the official, right? He can say whatever he wants now, but that's not official. They still need to go by what he said at the trial.
Correct. They are bound. The state is bound. What was said in trial in front of a judge and a jury. The book has no evidentiary value. It's just words. Mm-hmm. So you can't introduce what he said out of court. It's what was said in court that's important. They're stuck with it now.
And he used that when Bobby testified. He said that was the evidence that was submitted in court.
Correct.
I know what you're saying, One Strand. Yeah, I know what you're referring to. Oh, okay.
Yeah, correct. So that's why Kathleen Zellner has specifically stuck to the forensics and tried to break down the forensics. And she did, and her experts have done a brilliant job with all the pieces of evidence so far. But to me, the one that's going to have the greatest impact is item FL. No doubt. All right, guys, do we have any further questions or comments?
There was a question from Mystical Jinxie. She said, wonder about the 10-11 shells found on the ground. Why did they never fingerprint or DNA those to see if Avery prints or DNA on those? They most likely had Rolly's prints and DNA on them.
Yes.
Now, yeah, why did they just take one bullet to item FL?
Oh, look, they can't link the bullet to any of the shells. The problem is that once bullets are fired, because of the very high temperature in the chamber of the rifle, it's so high that it normally destroys DNA. It's very, very difficult to get DNA from a bullet shell, and it's also very difficult to get fingerprints. To me, I reckon all they've done is they've selected 10 shells and just threw them on the ground and said, oh, Brendan Dassey said they shot it 10 or 11 times. Oh, Lordy, look at this. There's 10 or 11 shells. But the reality is...
in Shawshank Redemption, through his pants, right?
Yeah. Or when Kathleen Zellner went into the garage, years later, she found a whole bucket of shells, right? So it's an illusion that she was shot 10 or 11 times. And the interesting thing is this, guys, I don't know if you've noticed that, but where they found item FL, did anyone see a pool of blood?
Nope.
No blood. Is that because Teresa Halbach or the victim was on the bulletproof tarp? Of course not. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. Completely crazy. Sammy, do you have a comment?
Well, first of all, there was no crime scene whatsoever. All of the things they did use were only used to point in one direction. Had they done a proper investigation and collected the things that should have been collected, it would have told a very different story and led somewhere else.
Correct. If you remove item FL, which I think you really should, then there's no evidence of Teresa Halbach being anywhere in the trailer or the garage. And the irony is this, right? You've got the hood latch. There's no Teresa Halbach DNA on her own car's hood latch. You look at the key. There's no DNA of Teresa Halbach on her own key, yet the magic bullet contains Teresa Halbach's DNA. So, and that's fired from a gun. And so it's completely inconsistent. Sammy, do you have a comment?
In the YouTube chat, Graham Moss is asking if there's retrial, can they change the narrative?
The state?
I believe so. I believe that's the question.
No, that's what they convicted Stephen and Brendan on, what was discussed in trial. You can't change the narrative. Whereas Kathleen Zellner is now taking apart the forensics. And now the state has got to answer a lot of very difficult questions.
Kathleen said her job was to undermine the confidence of the verdict.
Correct. And that's exactly what she's done. Because if you have a look at, I think just have a look at the slide where she talks about undermining the confidence of the state. Yeah, it's on slide 31. And basically the test results, she says, 1, the DNA on hood latch is not from saliva, but is too robust for touch DNA, which is true. And no bone was detected on item-FL. So the state, you can see that the state's forensic evidence is junk. Now, if you're watching the new series called The Innocence Files, which I recommend everyone to do, Foul Play is actually going to do a podcast looking at that case, and you can see what happens when you have flawed forensic evidence and the impact that it does.
God. Oh my
Jason,
God. That's the only comment I got about the Innocence Files and Dr. West. Oh my God. That guy.
No, that man is unreal.
That's a Ken Kratz
clone.
Worse than, really, in my opinion, because of the impact that he had on so many people and forensic odontology.
Correct. He destroyed it. He single-handedly destroyed the field, the integrity of the field.
You know, I'm just surprised that Ken didn't invite. I'm just surprised Ken Kratz didn't invite him to be an expert witness.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there was no body. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have invited him. But Foul Play, we're going to do podcasts on that series because it has some direct parallels to the Steven Avery, Brendan Dassey cases. Different players, but the same outcome. Phoebe.
Well, and ironically, you left off the slides today with Ken's book, and we have a PPP, a Powder Puff podcast coming out on Tuesday.
Oh, awesome.
And now our time's still the same, but Linda Case has moved her trash talk on Tuesday with one strand, and the ref is now following that at 7 p.m.
And
Central Time.
mind you, that will not be advertisement for his book, okay?
Well, but our podcast fits in nicely with his book because Sammy, you could tell Dr. Silkman about our Powder Puff.
Well, basically, we did Neverly brought to my attention that there's a document out there that was done, and it was like a deposition, and it was an affidavit that Kathleen Zellner asked for from Gershman. And and so we kind of covered that a little bit and talked a little bit about KK.
And he even brought up what Kratz is still doing on social media and in his book shouldn't be done, is not allowed really, and it's still prejudicing people for his new attempt at a trial.
Correct.
Or an overturning.
It's a disgrace.
I am a little curious about, Paul Capaldi, what are you thinking is going to transpire here?
Well, I had a but I don't. Yeah, I think the state are literally in a state now. I think they are really fortunate that there's been these delays and they've been given these delays. But I think inevitably, it's going to be interesting to see if the Eastern, is it the Court of Appeals of District 2, what their judges decide is ultimately is going to happen. Yes, I can well see the evidentiary hearing being granted, but if it isn't, then Kathleen Zellner simply will go up to the Supreme Court. And as you go higher up the court systems, you get less and less people who have an interest. I mean, even at the District 2 level, you've got Mark Gundrum as one of the judges there. So, you know, we wait to see what sort of, you know, what his opinion
is running out of the hourglass. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. No, awesome.
Listen, guys, I'm going to have to shoot off because I've thoroughly enjoyed my time here, but I've ran over schedule. So if you don't mind, I'm going to say cheerio. Thank you very much for having me.
A wonderful day.
And yeah,
pleasure,
you enjoy the rest of the day. We'll
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for coming,
Cheers.
Paul.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, guys. Any other further questions? Oh, one strand.
Oh, since BB was so kind to mention Linda Kay's listening and myself, we will be having our one and only Travis on with us Tuesday following Powder Puff. So if you have your questions you haven't gotten answered legally in this case, come on over and shoot them to Travis.
Awesome.
Oh, and also, aren't we on hiatus next weekend because of
the Mammothon?
Yeah.
Correct. I believe so. So we won't be doing a coffee podcast until the week after.
Right.
So no coffee next week, but the week after. Awesome. All right, guys. I am a bit conscious of the time. So guys, do we have any final comments or questions?
I think we're looking good over here.
We're looking good. Excellent. One strand.
I'm going to need a sedative when we do Mr. West. I'm just going to ask in advance. Anybody want to send me one? Because
you're so funny.
You're going to need more than a sedative. Trust me. So yeah, we will cover those trials because they're very, very interesting, and also the behavior of Dr. West is just unbelievable. And Neville, do you have any final comment?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for this expert presentation, and really thank you. It's much more clear because no matter what you read and how you look at it, if that's not at least for me, that's not my area of expertise, there was always like, what do you mean and whatnot. So now I'm almost 100%, maybe like 80, there to understand completely what's going on with this FL. And then regarding so thank you very much for that. And regarding you're welcome. Regarding the innocence files, it's not only Michael West who is the biggest douche on that show. It's all these innocent people that were in prison for life on death row, and stuff. But let's not forget that Steven was set up twice. And that he was twice. So as much as my heart goes out for these people, I think of Steven.
Yes.
I don't know how that guy is still alive, is mentally sane, and how he goes day by day.
And Brendan.
And Brendan
as well.
And Brendan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Snatched him from a nest. Yeah.
Yes, at age 16. All right, guys. If we have no final comment, I hope that all you guys have enjoyed the presentation today. It was intense, but I feel that we need to really understand the shenanigans that went on with Item FL. And listeners, thank you so much. If you enjoy the presentation, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And please, if you can, join us in Discord for some discussions after. Guys, any other final comments? Jack 61.
Just invite everyone that is interested of the case readings that we're doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Oh, yes.
Nights.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
They're interesting to go back now and reread this stuff. And I just feel it's important for everyone to kind of understand what the defense went through pre-trial.
Yes.
Of course, the trial's coming up, but everything's leading to the trial. So
correct.
Just invite everyone to come and listen if they have a chance, and if not, you can always go back and pick them up later.
Yes, fantastic. All right, guys. If there's no more, I'd like to thank our listeners and also for all their excellent questions, and also our panel, and also our special guest today, Paul Capaldi, for coming on. It's just been awesome experience. Thank you so much, guys. And hopefully we'll see you all at the Mammothon.
This has been a Foul Play production.